sometimes, yeah, I mean, maybe it shouldn't be that way, but I think, at this point in where we're at in the world, I think it's more, we shouldn't be thinking about what shouldn't be. I think we should be striving for what should be, and doing what we can to be the people that we needed. And yeah, maybe that sucks, but that's just the nature of the world as things change. I want to be the person that my 8-year-old self needed, right? I want to be that person that can communicate the confusion and communicate what I'm feeling and know the words and know the vocabulary and be like, this is what's up. And I want to be that person, so I'm going to try to be that person, not for anyone else, but for 8-year-old me. And I think that's the feedback loop of what life is.
Hey, welcome back to Normalize the Conversation. Today I'm here with mental health advocate and researcher Seika Brown. Thank you so much for joining me today. We actually met recently at the POV's premiere in New York City, so I'm really excited to get to have you on the podcast and have a great conversation with you.
Yeah, I am so glad for that opportunity to just met, in New York City, but I'm super excited. When I heard that you were another mental health advocate, I was like, let's go. So I'm very excited. Thank you so much.
Of course. Before we jump in, I wanted to check in. How are you really?
I'm good. I'm a little stressed, but I'm also a little excited. I'm a sophomore right now in university, but two of my closest friends, they're seniors, and so they're graduating. So it's like this last rush of getting them like their graduation gifts, and I'm meeting their families, and so it's like a little stressful because it's a little sad. Like they're my closest friends and they're leaving, but at the same time, I think it's nice that school's over and we're just able to spend time with each other and celebrate each other. So it's like a bittersweet, beautiful word. Yeah, feeling bittersweet today, but I'm pretty happy. So it's been a good time.
That's amazing. Congratulations to both of your friends. I know how hard it is to transition when suddenly your friends, like your best friends, aren't there anymore. I
Yeah.
know when my two best friends left after college, I was in grad school and they had graduated and moved away. They actually moved to other states. I did not know how to get through a
Yeah.
day without them. It was so weird.
Yeah, it's gonna be a struggle. Thankfully, because I'm up in upstate New York, so New York City is only about 4 hours away from me. So thankfully, one of them is gonna be in New York City. But at the same time, the other one, she's figuring it out. She's planning on going to med school. So it's really up in the air where she ends up going. So it's just this weird period. I'm gonna visit you. Don't stress about it. Any excuse to not go to school is a good excuse. So I'm very excited to watch them go into the next chapter. But yeah, it's gonna be a little sad coming up in the next few years.
Well, that is going to be a fun and heartbreaking and exciting journey.
Yeah.
But let's talk more about
But
you.
it's gonna be good.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's been good. I think this past month and a half has been pretty difficult. Actually, someone in the community that I'm around died by suicide. And it was very surprising. Obviously, I don't think anyone really expects it. In the same time when that happened, I took a break from my work actually. So I've been working in my mental health organization for 5 years, and I haven't really done an actual break. So I was like, I'm gonna take this break, and I think it was ended up being good timing to step away from my work and kind of have time to process that grief. But I think in the grand scheme of things, I'm very excited to go back into my research and the things that I've been doing with that. So it's been a difficult time, but I think I've done a good job taking a break. I do cultural research, so I have these conversations with people from across the world, and some of these conversations are really hard to have, and they're all in different time zones. So I'll meet with someone at 7 o'clock in the morning, and they're gonna tell me about abuse or about their suicidal ideation or their depression at right in the middle of the morning. And so it's difficult to find a balance between that. But I think taking this past break that was encouraged by my friends has been something that's been really good for my personal mental health. So it's been a lot of self-growth recently, despite the hardship. So I'm in this weird in between of feeling I'm going to be okay when I'm still kind of struggling in the moment.
thank you for being so honest. I think a lot of people struggle to, especially as mental health advocates, to admit when they need a
Yeah.
break. I know for me
Yeah.
personally, it's so hard to be like, oh, I need to step back and admit that sometimes I'm having way too many deep and heartbreaking conversations back to back, and it's affecting me.
Yeah. Yeah, I honestly didn't realize how much it would affect me, right? Because so the research I do, I interview people from different cultures, different backgrounds, and I hear about their experiences, how they talk about mental health, how do they define mental health, right? There's like this huge language barrier as well. So like, what kind of words, what's the language they use to talk about what we call mental health? And so it's really heavy stuff sometimes coming from different countries. Like right now, I'm doing interviews in the Nigerian time zone. So all my interviews at the moment and the research I'm doing is in Nigeria. And so you have this like huge stigma where you see a lot of women coming up and talking about mental health and talking about the need of talking about mental health. But their like vulnerability is so beautiful. At the same time, I'm like 20 years old, a sophomore in college, dealing with my own stuff. And I'm like, where is this good, healthy balance where I can be a supportive researcher with these people I'm interviewing, but equally, how do I like make sure I'm taking care of myself to support them and my friends and my family, and then of course myself. But it's like, I don't know, I never really thought about that until I got to the point where I had to, and I'm like, man, I should have thought about this. Like, I feel like a hypocrite, like that, I'm working in mental health and yet here I am not doing what I am preaching in a sense. So it's a weird dichotomy, but yeah, I think as mental health workers or advocates or just people who even work in the field of medicine, for example, you see this huge conversation of like, okay, how do we take care of doctors? How do we take care of clinicians? How do we take care of our counselors and our therapists, right? Like, what are they doing and what are we doing for them to make sure that they're doing okay? So it's been like a flip of a switch where I'm like kind of focusing on me, but focusing on other people at the same time. So yeah, it's a weird thing that I'm figuring out, but I'm getting there slowly but surely.
It's definitely a weird thing to balance because at some points it's like, I need to power through. I need to have these conversations. I need to finish my research. I need to finish my work. And at some points I need to just take a break and decompress so that I can have the best conversations and be supportive when people are talking to me. I love that you are kind of going around the world and having these conversations. When I get to have people from different countries coming on the podcast, it is so interesting to me to see how different it is, right? In the Western culture, we're a lot more medication based versus in the Eastern culture, it's a lot more maybe meditation or herbs or just these different
it's a lot of spirituality. Yeah, it's really interesting. So I'm half Japanese, and so my mom was born and raised in Japan and my dad was born and raised in England, and they had me in the United States. So it's like this weird, even though like, England and like the US are very similar. My dad grew up in a military family, in a family that often traveled across Europe. And so it's like, there's also like mental health in different professions and settings, right? So it's like this really interesting experience growing up of just kind of the way my dad grew with mental health and how my mom saw mental health, especially because she is a very spiritual person. She's very like, she's always talking about giving respect to the things that we use. She's very delicate, but like respectful and life-giving to everything. And I think it's great. At the same time, like I had this struggle in connecting with that part of my family, connecting with that part of my culture while living in the US. And so that's what inspired me doing cultural research, because like I had to hear about the culture that my mom came from in order to understand myself better and understand my family dynamic better. And I think there's this important thing, especially as we become more globalized with technology, the more we're able to have these Zoom conversations, especially post-COVID, like we need to have a good basis and understanding of what the cultures around the world looks like. And I feel like that will give us a little ounce of like ability to give respect, or at least understanding that maybe we don't understand. And so it's very interesting. Like I'll have conversations with people who talk about how people with mental illness are more praised in their country or in their culture, that like this person is like going through this battle and like they're supported. And there was like this small town in India that my mentor interviewed, and people who had like schizophrenia were actually supported. They were like idolized. They were like, oh, these people are able to talk to the gods that they believe. And so it's just like, you see this really interesting shift between Western cultures where people are looked down upon versus cultures that kind of praise it. I'm not going to say which one is more healthier than the other, because like that's not my place to judge or something, but I think it's really interesting to see the ways people talk and treat the people in their cities and their societies and their cultures. So it's really interesting, but it's also very complex. There's a lot that goes into it, but I definitely enjoy what I do.
First of all, that is such a wise perspective to have at such a young age, that we need to be having these conversations, that you needed to understand your parents' culture and where they came from and how mental health was talked about where they grew up, to be able to understand yourself better, and then to go and conduct research on an international level to understand all these other
Yeah.
cultures. That is mind-blowing, especially being so young. How old were you when you started having these conversations?
So I started my work in mental health when I was 15. I was a sophomore in high school. There was a problem. So I took a psychology class for one semester my sophomore year of high school. And the problem and solution that we had to it was like this sophomore psychology project. And we had to find a problem. The problem was rising stress and anxiety rates. And the solution that I came up with was to come up with like a mental health club where like we don't make anything new. We just share the resources that the school district already provided. Long story short, my school district said no. My principal said no, stupid idea. We don't want that. I was 15. I was stubborn and I was upset. I was like, screw you. So I went to the governor and I like emailed all the state legislators and senators in my state. I come from Washington State. And I ended up getting invited to work on a bill. And so then I founded my first nonprofit at 15 with my friends from high school. And we worked in 2 legislation sessions, working on 2 bills, and we ended up passing one in 2019. And then coming to college, my fall of 2020, I was kind of like stepping back. I was like looking at the past 3 years at that point. I was 18. And I was like, I just spent the past 3 years working in policy and mental health. Sorry, my screen might have glitched a little bit. Anyways, I was like looking at myself. I was like, I had a friend that went to the Navy. So I was like, I have like my friends, they're in this club with me, in this nonprofit with me. And I'm not going to ask them to continue that as they go into the next chapter in their life. And I was reflecting and I ended up deciding that, okay, I might switch perspectives. I might go into research. I might go into like this cultural conversation. Again, like at that point, I was getting a lot closer to my mom. And I really want to understand where she was coming from. And so I had a lot, like during COVID, like during the pandemic, I had a lot of conversations with her, just like how she grew up and then the way that she grew up. And I think that gave me a lot of, I don't know, grace, and the grace I can give to her. And I was like, this is a conversation we need, not just like personally, one-to-one. This is a conversation we need to have globally. This is a conversation that we need to see globally. And that's kind of what inspired me. So I kind of started this next initiative of mine at like 19, and I'm 20 at the moment. And so it's been about a year, and I've been able to work with a lot of really cool people. October of 2020, I was on a panel with the ex-chief of health of UNICEF. His name is Stefan Peterson, and he's from Sweden. He is this really cool guy. He's worked in UNICEF and the WHO for years. And he just retired, and he invited me to work on another project with him. So I've been working with like Hopkins University and the Karolinska Institute, which is a medical university in Sweden, on another research project around adolescent mental health globally. So I definitely dipped my toes into research and fell in love with it, and it's been a great ride ever since. But yeah, it's the research side of things. It's been about a year and a half, but the mental health field side of things has been about 5 years. So it's been a journey for sure.
That is absolutely incredible. Going back to in high school, when they said no to just a mental health club providing resources or sharing resources,
I was like, that's crazy.
It goes to show how little prioritization there is toward mental health and supporting youth.
Yeah. It was definitely like insane to me. So my brother actually, like what led me into the field was my brother struggles with like chronic depression. He was 12 when he attempted suicide. I was 8. And it was like this thing, and I grew up with it. In a way, it was kind of like a blessing in disguise. He's great now. He's married. He has a great job. But it was kind of like something that shook my family. And I think my brother definitely took a lot of the weight on his shoulders. And I kind of grew up with his healing process, right? Like I grew up with him learning that his depression's okay. I grew up learning that like this is something that happens to people. And I was super young, and I was able to grow up with his healing process and be with him as he was going through that healing process. But that's why I was surprised coming into high school. Like I'm like, oh my gosh, like we're still lacking all these things that my brother needed. And I was shocked. And then I was even more shocked when they said no. But I think there's like this huge like stigma in the mental health field that we have to like force our way through to be heard. I don't think it has to be such an aggressive approach all the time. I was able to work with my school district. I was able to work with my principal, because if I forced my way through, that wouldn't change their own perspective, right? You can pass a bill, but that doesn't change the people who receive it. And I think what I was able to do is sit down with my principal, and I was able to have these conversations with her. And at the end of it, like, her and I be great friends. Like, where I like talked to her and email her all the time. Like, this was like, a shift that we both had to learn through. And I was able to make this connection with her. So it took a 3-year process, but it's a process that we need to go down. I was definitely surprised when I was 15, but I was thankful when I graduated. I was just like, we were able to do a good difference. I was able to help this community, and she was able to help this community. And so now they do have a mental health resource club. And I'm like, it started off, with anger and being upset, and I think that's completely valid, but also like taking that anger and producing it and using it as fuel to make a connection, I think is a beautiful way. And I was able to do that in high school, so I was very thankful.
It is definitely a beautiful way, and to come from such a place of pain and to take that and use it to provide those resources or make those resources accessible that, like you said, your brother had needed, and that these conversations just weren't being had. But as an 8-year-old, after kind of finding out your brother had attempted suicide, what was that like for you? What were some of the thoughts going through your head?
Yeah, I think it's kind of like one of those things. I was 8, I was very ignorant. I was a child, like I was a kid. My entire family, my entire life, my parents struggled with like substance abuse, drug abuse, alcohol abuse. My family struggled financially. We were, I come from a very low income family. My dad is the only one that has a job. And it was something that I didn't recognize that was like odd. I thought I didn't think anything about it. I was like, this is just what life is. And then when my brother attempted suicide, it wasn't like I was 8 and I had the vocabulary to explain what just happened. What the most frustrating emotion was confusion, because I didn't know what depression was. I didn't know what suicide was. And arguably, should an 8-year-old know what that is? I don't know. But like, I had no knowledge. I had no one to turn to. My dad was in jail at the time for like DUIs and drug abuse. And so I was very much alone. And I think it wasn't really much of the loneliness that was upsetting. It was the confusion. It was like, why is no one telling me what just happened, what I just witnessed? I think being young, it wasn't necessarily the hurt of the situation itself. It was the hurt of not understanding. And I think that is just more of an example of what happens when a kid has to witness life happening, like if a parent dies or if someone goes through something and the child's young, being honest with them despite their young age, I think is really important. I definitely wouldn't change anything about my life, but I always think like, if I become a mother and I have a kid and something happens, like I would want to be honest with them. I want to treat them obviously in a way that's loving and supportive as a parent would be. But I don't think my parents or my brother even addressed that situation, like with the terms of suicide and depression, until maybe I was 16, 8 years later, after I kind of learned through it myself. Like I remember being in 7th grade and like learning about the term suicide and depression, and like, that's what it was. Like, it took me this long to learn what that was. Like, why did no one tell me what was going on? And I think there was a lot of hurt years after. Right. It was just kind of like a scar that just built up, and then you end up picking at it at one time and it kind of all flows back out again. So it was more of a healing process when I was much older. But as like 8 years old, I was just confused. I was just like, I don't know what's going on. And I never learned what was going on until I was much older.
It makes sense to be confused when people aren't having those conversations. And like you said, should an 8-year-old know? In my opinion, that's one of the biggest questions that we're facing when it comes to youth mental health and youth mental health advocacy. Because what is age appropriate to talk about with the kid? Where is the line of scaring them and giving them that information and resources that they need to have the language to speak up, to have the language to support someone who may be struggling?
Yeah. And I definitely think about that all the time now, the more I do my research. And it's like, I think it's one of those things, maybe it's not just preparing the children, but it's preparing the parents, right? It's preparing the teachers and the staff of elementary school age, groups. I think, how does a parent, like, I had to learn to give sympathy and grace to my mom. Like, how does a mother who immigrated from a different country that doesn't barely speak English and, you know, her husband's in jail. Like, how does a mother explain to her 8-year-old daughter, you know, this like circumstance, like this thing? Like, as a parent, you're going through shock, right? As a parent, you're going through this, your own set of grief. And I had to give that down the line. I had to give her that grace down the line, because how does anyone deal with that situation when there's no resources to support either side? So I think it's like, you know, there should be some good education, and education that should occur maybe even high school and middle school. But I think teaching people how to have these conversations in general will help people have these conversations when situations like that arise, right? Like, if my mom was able to talk about depression or just mental health in general with her friends back home, or just in normal day-to-day conversation, maybe it would have given her some substance to, you know, talk to me about it at one point. But I think it's less of like, you know, the question of, should we be teaching our kids? I don't think anyone's being taught mental health, right? I don't think anyone's receiving good mental health education. So let's tackle that idea first. Let's tackle mental health education, put that into our schools, and then tackle the scenarios like my own, where you see young people like at the really young age of like 8 and 10 dealing with, you know, this type of, you know, problem. But I think it's important to secure just the future generations' understanding of mental health before we start picking, you know, apart the small circumstances that happen. I think it's really important to prepare people in general. And I think that helps us, you know, prepare for when life happens and things get kind of sad, or when things suck.
I completely agree with you. And going back to what you said about how parents they weren't taught either. Even if we start mental health education in schools right now, that's still not giving parents the ability to have the conversations at home with their kids. So there needs to be a major crossover and resources being sent home to parents. But as a parent, from conversations with my own parents, for them, when I had attempted, they were just terrified. So they were acting out of fear. So when they were yelling at me, it wasn't because they were yelling at me. They were just a situation that was unimaginable. And how do you respond? How do you tell the younger cousins when I'm in a hospital not answering my phone anymore? How do you tell my brother why I'm not home? It was just very confusing for them. They didn't have the language, they didn't have the knowledge, they didn't understand why this would happen, and they didn't know how to respond. So I completely agree that it's definitely a lot more than just providing the information in schools. It's ways that we can bring it home and translate this over to the adults.
Yeah. And I think that's actually something I just realized recently. So the WHO just came out with a mental health report. When the WHO gave mental health a definition, that was about 21 years ago. It was 2001. And a lot has changed from 2001. And so it's super interesting to read through this report. But something like hit me when I was reading it. I was like, I think it's good that we have so much emphasis on youth mental health and adolescent mental health. But what about the parents of these adolescents and the parents of these young people? I think that's where a lot of mental health discourse happens, is when you have a young kid who's becoming educated and parents who aren't educated around mental health. And then you have like these butting heads where the kid's like, why don't you understand the facts here? It's because the parents aren't getting the same facts. They're not being taught the same things. And it's like, it's a beautiful question in the sense of, like I mentioned, like there was someone in my community that recently died by suicide. And she had like 2 younger siblings that are like the ages of like 8 and 10. And it's like, how do you go home and explain the situation to them? And how do you go home and, you know, tell them this is what occurred? And it's one of those things where it's a question with little answers. But at the same time, I think not neglecting the older generation when we think about mental health. I think youth mental health is extremely important, right? I'm a youth mental health advocate. I'm a youth mental health researcher. I'm here for the young people, but it's not just about young people. It's about the world. It's about our mental health together. And there's a lot of things that affect young people's mental health. And I think recently, like again, in my research just a few days ago, it was like, I need to be talking to the parents of these individuals or the older generation to see how they view mental health. And I think the moment we start seeing how the older generations view mental health and how the younger generations view mental health, I think we'll start to see and understand why there's stigma, right? Why is there these things? My mom grew up in a post-World War II Japan. Like she grew up with a country that was rebuilding itself. She grew up with her parents who came from World War II Japan. Like that is the cultural background and historical background of her life. that is something I'm never going to understand. And I'm like, how am I supposed to tell her that she needs to hear about why I'm so stressed or why I'm so anxious, when this is the background that she has yet to heal from. And so like giving her the chance to talk through her own, trauma, her own, uncomfortability of just the things that she's been through, I think was a good, conversation to have with my mom. I felt like I started to see her as my mom, and I felt like she started to see me as her daughter. And then we finally had this good relationship. Yeah, I think the more I've done adolescent, mental health research, the more I've realized that we have such a great data pool now of young people, but with such a neglected data pool of the older generations. And that kind of shows, I think, when we have these conversations, that a lot of people just don't know how to talk about it. And not just young people, just people in general, just across the board.
Exactly. First, I want to say I'm really sorry for your loss. Losing someone in your community to suicide is never easy, especially as a mental health advocate when you're fighting against it so hard and it still happens. But back to your point, it is, I think, very difficult from a youth perspective to see our parents as humans too. Yeah. We really want them to kind of step up and take our pain away and be there for us, and recognizing that they might not have the emotional capacity. And that doesn't mean that you're not loved or you're not important. And I think there's a lot of discord, like you said, in those conversations. And that's one thing that when I started my nonprofit, I was adamant about, was bridging that gap in communication. When I built the first workbook, there's an actual section in it that's meant to have a kid and a parent practice having a conversation together and practice making a plan, to follow up with each other, because it's not just a one-time conversation. But if we're not providing the tools and a guide and a sample, how is anyone supposed to know? Because we didn't grow up having these conversations.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like, it's such a, obviously it seems so obvious when we say it, but it's just something that just has not clicked in this field for a while. And I'm like, gosh. And I think it's, like we said, it's so important to prepare our generations and the next generations of individuals for mental health care. But for the sake of our mental health and the mental health of young people, it's equally, how do we supply our parents with this type of tool? And I think that comes into the workforce kind of conversation, right? Like the places where my mom would work or my dad would work, right? Having this kind of, tools and access for mental health for adults who are in the workforce, depending, for doctors, mental health of doctors has been a huge conversation after COVID, or mental health. I know the construction workforce is a workforce that extremely struggles with mental health and mental illness, right? So how do we help them? It's providing tools to places where people already are at. And I think that's another thing where I think we could see a lot more support in, not just in schools, but in the people who lead the schools, the people who lead, the supermarkets and the libraries and, the doctor offices, and people who build our houses, and the people who help us, right? Like, how do we take care of those people as well? I think that's the next step, is providing those tools and resources to where adults are and also where kids are. And I think that's, once we start doing that, I think we'll start seeing a little bit more family discourse and individual discourse around mental health.
120%. We don't focus on, first of all, you hear suicide prevention and you would think people are using tools and resources to prevent future suicides. But having it on a website that you have to take 200 other clicks to find,
thank you.
Suicide prevention. It's not helping.
It's not the same. It doesn't do anything.
Exactly.
I'm sure there is some benefit to it, but it's one of those things. It's like taking a cough drop when you have a cough. Sure, it helps for a little bit, but it barely does anything. And suicide prevention is so much more than just an online toolkit, right? It's so much more than just something that you can, you have to dig for, and then you have a crisis line. I think those are steps that we need, but I think they're intermediate steps, right? As we prepare larger areas of resource. I think Mental Health America does a great job in this concept of before stage 4, where it's, yes, suicide prevention is really important. But what is suicide prevention? Is it just preventing them from the act of suicide, or is it preventing them from even the thought of suicide, right? Is it, assisting people before they get to that last stage, right? It is, suicide prevention should not just start with the concept of suicidal ideation, it should start before people actually get to that level and that stage of in their depression or in their mental illness, right? So how do we help people before they get to stage 4, which is suicide? And I love that concept of assisting people, before they get a diagnosis, after they get a diagnosis, how to be there through that with them, through these stages, through, the difficulties, and how do we determine whether is this like a circumstantial thing, right? Let's say someone passes in the community, and people think about it, and this is like a developed depression, or is this a chronic disorder, right? So I think there is this, suicide prevention is a very broad term. It's not just like, oh, right before. It's not, yes, crisis lines are important, but it's not just like in the crisis of thinking about suicide. That's not prevention. Prevention would be way before that. Like I always say, like you're not going to prepare for an earthquake after the earthquake happens. You're not going to prepare for a flood after the flood happens. You're not going to prepare for it, after a disaster happens. You prepare for it beforehand. So it's like, what do we do? What are we doing before, all these intermediate steps? And what are we doing after all these intermediate steps, and not just leaving people with, webinars, which I think are good. But at the same time, I think it's important to be with people as they get a diagnosis, before they get a diagnosis, after they get a diagnosis.
Exactly. Targeting people before life stressors are tearing them apart.
Yes.
We're going to deal with so much loss in our lifetimes. That's just the reality of the world. We're going to lose people. People are going to pass away. We're going to lose our pets. We're going to lose jobs. Like there's so much financial insecurity is going to happen. I can't speak. So many things are going to happen. But how do we help people before all of that happens and they're standing on the ledge, ready to jump?
Exactly.
How do we help them before they get to the point? We tend to wait till someone has the gun in their hand, they're standing on the ledge to say, oh, they're not making it up. This is serious. They need help.
Like, and I think as time has developed in mental health, I would say it has become less stigmatized. I still think there's a lot of stigma to it, but I think the work of people have been beneficial. And I think back to when I started when I was 15 versus now at 20. Yeah, there's a huge difference between what it was like back then and what it is like now. And that's a 5-year span. But equally, I think I 100% agree with you. It's, before people get to those points. But it's also like, I think that's just like health 101. Recognizing mental health similar to physical health is so important. Recognizing people without disorders, mental health is not a conversation with those people who just have an illness, right? It's like, you don't talk about physical health only with patients of like cancer. You talk about physical health with children. You talk about physical health with people when they're healthy, so that if they do become sick, they know what to do. And I think it's the same thing. It's like, you don't talk about mental illness just with those that are mentally ill. You don't talk about disorders. You don't talk about diagnoses just with people who need to receive them. You talk about, to the community. And I think that's a great way to, help people, is having these conversations, be like, no, this is real. And this happens. And this is happening either to you or to a person right next to you. Mental health is a daily thing. It happens to everyone. If I've learned one thing in my research, every country is talking about mental health, but obviously in their own way. That it's a conversation. It is part of our daily lives. And when life happens and disorders, arise, and you start to feel ill, you start to feel sick, what are we doing for ourselves and the people in our lives? And I think that is the next big question of recognizing mental health, not as, a crisis, but as our daily life. And just being there with people. Like, it's going to happen. It's going to exist. Depression happens in like 1 in 3 people. It's such a common thing that we see. But how do we make sure that this common thing doesn't get to a place that is destructive and hurtful to a person's own body? And I think suicide prevention, obviously at the core, is important. But how are we teaching people to love, and how are we teaching them to love others and themselves? I think is so important. But I would say it comes down to just doing our best to like see gratitude and see love in our day to day. But it's very difficult given the state of the world. So yeah.
It is. And one thing that I always say to my family members who don't necessarily understand, when I'm like, oh, I have therapy today, they're like, why, what's wrong? Like, are you still not over what's happened? And I'm like, no, but it's still like a good place to grow, to develop new boundaries for myself, to vent, because I am stressed. I'm dealing with hearing people's really depressing stories, and my heart shatters
Yeah.
every single time. And having someone to debrief that with and make sure my self-care routine is in place. But to them, it's more reactive, not proactive. So I explain it as when you go to the doctor at a young age, they give you the tetanus shot. You might go get a flu shot. They're going to check your eyes. Even if you can see perfectly, they're still going to make you stand there and read the letters like this.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're going to check your hearing. They're just going to check these things. They're going to give you the tools that you need. They're not going to wait until you are completely blind to say, oh, maybe we should check your eyesight. They're not going to wait till you have chicken pox to say, oh, maybe we should give you the chicken pox vaccine right now.
Exactly. And I think, that's the perfect way to put it, right? It's, normalizing the conversation is the kind of slogan that I think we're seeing nowadays. I love the advocacy and I love the activism and I love what people are doing. And it's about the normalization of mental health. It's not about the idolization of mental health. It's about recognizing that mental health is physical health too. It's this mix. And physical illness is physical illness and mental illness is mental illness, and neither should be stigmatized either, right? But I think coming to terms that I'm going to go check if I need contacts and glasses, and I'm going to go check if I just need some medicine. I think it just goes in its own way. And I think that's a beautiful way to put it, is that mental health is part of our daily lives. It's real to you. It's real to me. It's real to anyone. And right, how do we make sure that we're doing well when we are well, and how are we taking care of ourselves when we're not well? And I think, kind of having that's a beautiful example of this is just a checkup. This is just a check-in with myself. This is to see where I'm at, and this is where I can let go. And I think that's a really healthy way to look at it, is this is just part of our daily lives. This is something that's real to everyone.
Exactly. We all have mental health. Where we are on the scale will change every day. Some people may be doing great. Some people may be on the floor crying, not wanting to move. Both of them are completely normal. But what are we doing to help people on both ends to either maintain or get to that point?
Yeah. I think another thing is also what are we doing to support those people, right? If I'm my friend and I, we took a walk the other day and we just sat outside at 10 p.m. and she was like, how are you doing? And I'm like, yeah, I'm doing good. And because she was not doing good. And it was this thing, because I was looking back in the past month and a half, and I imagine with my friend who passed away, and this community grieving, and my work and school and everything that was going on. I'm truly the past month and a half, I was not good. But in this moment, I'm doing good. And I think recognizing that was such a beautiful conversation of she's like, okay, how are you doing? I'm I think I'm doing good right now. And she's like, okay, can I talk? Right. You have this kind of, conversation that's okay, where are you at? Okay, cool. Do you have the capacity to hear me? And I think that's a beautiful thing that you see in a friendship, is that this mutual respect, where are you? Where am I? Okay, cool. Let's continue. And I think, that kind of self check-in with your friends or your family or even yourself is so important. And I think it's just something that happens in the moment, right? You're giving yourself grace. It's just this is where I'm at. And I think, I'm doing good in this moment. So I want to help my friend to, maybe not be good, right? I don't think we need to force ourselves to be better or force ourselves to be good. It's about, recognizing that maybe we're not doing so well, and maybe we're not doing okay. And that's fine. We don't need to rush the healing process. I think it's just need to recognize that healing is okay. And it's a process more than it is to rush the process itself. I think it's just okay, we're checking in with each other. We're seeing where each other are at. There's nothing I can do to make my friend's life better than just listen and be there and just sit with her and just be yeah, this is life, and it's going to keep happening, but I'm here with you, and I'm here to walk this path of life with you. I can't solve, all these problems, but I can exist alongside you as you face life and as I face life. I think that's what friendship is. I think that's what family is. I think it's recognizing that illness can't just be taken out of a person. It's just with a person, and, recognizing that person is there, and recognizing that illness is just there with them. It is what it is. And not seeing them for anything. It's just seeing them for the person that they are, not the attachments that they have. And just I'm here to walk life with you, no matter what's going on. And I think that's a beautiful way to recognize mental health. It's you have a sprained ankle, I'll walk slower. It's just you're going through something, I'm here with you. I think keeping it simple, keeping it normal, and keeping it how it is such a beautiful blessing. not like making it like this serious, like hard, like thing. Like, those conversations are important, but like recognizing a person where they're at and being like, yeah, man, I'm here with you. I'm here with you all the way through.
That, I think, is the most beautiful definition of love, because
Mm.
that's kind of like what a marriage vow is. In sickness and in health, we're there. And I think that should translate among every relationship, that we're there for all of it. And we might not have the words to support someone. We might not have the knowledge or the resources right there, or the ability to save someone, but we have a shoulder to cry on. We have someone just to sit there to listen.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's important to recognize that it's okay to not know, but it's also okay to just walk alongside them and be there and listen.
Yeah. And I think that's like I think that's what we can do, as we're figuring out the resources, as we're figuring out the toolkits and the preventions and the tactics. I think that's what we can teach people to do internally. That's what we can do as people, as individuals. I think this is like a beautiful habit and, type of wellness that we can all practice across the slate. Is like, in my research, I love it. I love that it's research, but like in my opinion, it's not even research. It's just having a conversation with a person. It's just like this. It's just like, okay, like, what's up? Like, where you're at? Like, what is mental health to you? Where are you, like, how are you feeling? And I think there's such a beauty in listening. I think, before we start going and jumping to solutions, I think sometimes we're not even hearing the problem. Right. I think sometimes the problem is this rush to have a solution when what a person needs is just some ears to listen. I think listening is a virtue that we like skip over a lot. And I think that's what the basis of any relationship is. It's the relationship with yourself, right? How are you listening to yourself and your own needs? And then your relationship with your friends, how are you listening to them? Are they listening to you? Like, is this like a mutual thing? And then with your family or a significant other, like, is your partner listening to you? Are you listening to them? Or again, but like, it goes back to yourself too. Like, are you listening to yourself? Are you listening to what your body needs? Are you taking those breaks? Are you eating healthy? Are you doing what you need to do? And I think listening is like the core of having a relationship with anything or anyone. And if we skip over that, I think there's a lot of detriment to it. And I think as we figure out the next steps in prevention and toolkits and et cetera, I think listening is something that we can all strive to do a little bit more. I know that I can say that for myself. I can be a better listener every day I wake up. And I don't think that's something that we have to find heartbreaking. I think that's something that we can find as beautiful. And that's something that we can strive for.
I completely agree. Listening is the most important part, I think, of having a conversation, and not listening to form a response, listening to hear and to understand. And I think we've shifted in society as more of listening to respond. Everyone wants to respond. I don't want to say everyone, I don't want to generalize, but many of us want to have a response, have the last word, be right, know everything. And that's not what real communication is. Real communication is listening, trying to understand. And you may not agree with someone, you may not completely understand where they're coming from, but listening and giving them a chance to feel heard, and then responding, whether it's with words or with action or just with being there.
Yeah. And I think, again, that's something that I've kind of took, to heart recently. I was like talking to my friend like about her parents. And then I think there's like this panic in us, right? Like you kind of said about your parents, it wasn't like they were yelling at you to yell at you. They were yelling at you out of panic, right? Out of like, I don't understand what's going on and I'm stressed and I want to help you, but I don't know how to help you. And so like, I think people jump to response because they don't know how to respond. And they want to just say anything they can say. They want to do anything they can do. But that's a little bit overwhelming for the other individual, right? Like, sometimes you don't need that response. Sometimes you don't need those things. Like all you needed was to like vomit your words. And then the other person in a panic doesn't know how to respond. And I think that's what a lot of listening is too. Like you said, like not to generalize, but I think it's also just like, some people have good intentions and we just don't know how to communicate that. It's not that people are responding out of ill intent. It's not that you're responding out of ill intent. It's not that I'm responding out of ill intent. It's just like, we want to help people. We want to help our friends. We want to help our families, but we don't know how to do that sometimes. I think recognizing that, again, like you said, that it's okay that you don't know is a great place to start. Being like, I don't know how to help you, but I'm here with you and we can figure this out step by step together. I think that is a lot more productive than being like, okay, well, like, maybe like, did you work out today? Like, did you work out 30 minutes like you're supposed to? Like, like there's some responses that are coming from a loving area, but that just don't communicate love well. I don't think people, I think humans are a lot better than we give them credit for. I think everyone wants to do their best for the people they love. And I think everyone wants to do what they can do for people, and recognizing that we will fail in that. I think that's okay. Right. I think there's grace with that. But I definitely agree that listening is such an important part. And it's not about the response, right? It's not about the words you say next. It's not about formulating those sentences. Like I know I do that sometimes. Like I'll go into like a coffee shop and like rehearse what I'm going to tell the barista, but like, it's not like that. It's just, sitting there, and like it's just the conversation I had the other day with my friend, just sitting there and being like, yeah, life is very uncertain. But if I'm searching about anything, it's like in this moment, I'm with you and I'm hearing you, and we'll figure it out together in the next few steps. And I think that's a lot more productive than giving them a whole list of things that they can change.
I agree. And to your point of intention, that's something that I'm so passionate about, is recognizing how people may sound very hateful or mean, or like they don't care, especially when it comes to mental health. But a lot of times it is coming from good intention. It's just coming from their knowledge and perspective. Yeah. So their knowledge and perspective may be from growing up in a community or in a family that said mental health wasn't real, and that you have to be strong to be resilient to get through life. So when they're responding, they think that's good advice, and recognizing that it's okay if someone doesn't respond the way you need them to, but being able to continue the conversation to understand where they're coming from as well, so that they can learn to support you and you can learn how to take their words, because it genuinely might not be that they don't love you. It might not be that they are hateful and don't believe in mental health. It might just be an error in communication, a misunderstanding.
Yeah, not everyone's good with words, but I think it's very much human nature. I think speaking is, for most people, is like the easiest thing that we can do sometimes. It's a lot easier than giving a gift or, giving them a present or something. Like it's difficult to communicate. And I think it's difficult to communicate on both sides. That's not to discredit the people, right? I think you're allowed to be hurt. You're allowed to be like, you hurt me. Like you're allowed to say that the person's response was hurtful. And I think equally though, holding on to that hurt versus recognizing that hurt are two different things. Like I could be hurt by a response, and I can be like, that hurt me, and that can hurt me for a little, a good amount of time. But I don't want to hold on to pain. I don't want to hold on to anger, and like learning, right, to like cycle that through, I think is equally important. People, most times I would like to say people have intention of like, of a good heart. Obviously there's times where that's taken advantage of, and you are taken advantage of. And I think those are circumstances to neglect. Those are things that we can recognize, but equally, just coming in and being like, yeah, like, okay, like that wasn't the most productive conversation we could have had. And I think it's a lot more healing when a person can be like, okay, that didn't necessarily help. Like, I don't need advice right now. I just need a friend that can just listen. And the other person respond like, okay, yeah, like that helps. Like, I think, again, people just want to know what they can do. And I think sometimes that instruction of like what you actually need is so important. I had a friend who like I just remembered this past month was like, you should tell, this is my friend from home. She was like, you should tell your friends, at college, what kind of support you need. I'm like, that feels weird. Like, I don't want to be like, oh, like I just need X, Y, and Z. And she's like, no, like they love you, right? And you love them. Like, don't you respect them enough to tell them what you actually need? And I was like, yeah, I guess. But like, that kind of feels weird to be like, again, this is what I need, X, Y, and Z. But I tried it out. I was like, hey, like, actually, I don't really, like, advice is just a bit overwhelming in this moment. They're like, okay, thank you. Like, I don't know what you need right now. So like, if you can tell me what you need, that would help. And like to hear that like affirmation of like, it's not necessarily about, right, like taking someone's advice, be like, yeah, it's like, okay, like maybe that's not what I need in this moment. And to have the other person be like, okay, perfect. Thank you for telling me this. Like, what can I do to help you? I think was a beautiful interaction to have. Of, people, again, they have good intent. I think learning to be comfortable with what hurts and what upsets us and what, supports us is okay. Again, you're allowed to feel every emotion that you're feeling, and being able to communicate that, I think, is a very beautiful thing to do.
I really love that your friend told you to ask for the support that you need. People they can't read your mind. They don't know what kind of support you need. And for me, that was something that was so difficult to learn. Literally last night, I was just at a place of complete overwhelmingness where I was crying. I was just like, I feel like I'm failing. I feel like the world is not getting any better. I feel like no
Yeah.
matter how much I try, like I'm not making enough of an impact.
Yes.
I'm not having enough of a reach. And I was just overwhelmed. And
Yeah.
my parents were trying to offer me advice.
Mhm.
And I was like, you're not understanding. I need a hug.
Yeah.
I was like, I
Mhm.
just need a hug. And if
Mhm.
you like can't give me the hug right now, just we need to separate for a little bit until I
Yeah.
can like calm down. And they gave me the hug that I needed. And
Mhm.
then I went to my room and I just laid down for an hour, and
Mhm.
then it was okay. But if they had just
Mhm.
continued to give me this advice and this like positive, encouraging talk, like I was like, I get
Mhm.
it. I know, day by day, keep going. I get that. But
Yeah.
right now, I just need to like be held for a second and know
Yeah.
that like it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. There was like like the other week where I was just not well, and my friends were like, "Oh, just like, just like watch a movie or something." And I was like, I don't I don't think that'll make me feel better. I had another friend that was just like, "I need to cry too. Can I pick you up in 5 minutes and we can just cry together?" And I was like, "Yeah, that sounds wonderful. Are you kidding me?" So she picks me up and we talk. We just both like sob, and I'm like, "This is a great time." Like, like just sitting with each other, I think is like such a thing, a good thing. And I love that your parents were able to like respond well of it in the sense of like, like I don't need advice. I don't need to shove my emotions away. I think it's okay to cry. Like just it's okay to, be sad. It's okay to grieve. It's okay to be like, in this moment, I'm not well and I'm going to cry and I'm going to be upset. I think it's better to let yourselves feel your emotions fully than to like try to cut them midway. I think, okay, I'm going to spend probably the next 2 hours crying, and hopefully at the end of it, I'll like go, fall asleep out of exhaustion and wake up feeling a little bit better. Like sometimes you just got to feel what you feel. And I think there is like productivity behind that.
Exactly. And it's okay to let someone cry and just to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And for those listening, it was not like an overnight thing that my parents finally just were like, okay, we'll give you the
Yeah.
hug. It took like 3 years and writing 2 books about how to do this to get my parents to understand that they don't have to
Mm-hmm.
stop me from crying. They just sometimes have to be there when I can't show up for myself or when my
Yeah.
dog's kisses aren't making it better.
Yeah, exactly. And exactly, like these aren't things that you're going to pick up or your friends are going to pick up or your family's going to pick up in a day or 3 days or a night, etc. Like this is something that you learn, right? And like, how are you responding and how are the people in your life responding? I think, there's an example, and, people can follow. Like, it's just, it's not going to be like a nightly thing. It's a constant. I think it's ever changing. I think I'm always going to grow. I think I'm always going to learn more tactics and more ways to be there with people and how to be there for myself, and giving people grace and giving myself grace, more importantly, I think is so important. Just like, I'm not going to get it right. Neither anyone else. And I'm going to fail and I'm going to struggle, and I'm just going to let myself do that. And I'm going to let them do that. And I think there is like, a practice of love that we have. I think there is like grace in that. Like, yeah, you had to write 2 books to get your parents to hear you. And sometimes, yeah, I mean, maybe it shouldn't be that way, but I think, at this point in where we're at in the world, I think it's more, we shouldn't be thinking about what shouldn't be. I think we should be striving for what should be, and doing what we can to be the people that we needed. And yeah, maybe that sucks, but that's just the nature of the world of as things change. I want to be the person that my 8-year-old self needed, right? I want to be that person that can communicate the confusion and communicate what I'm feeling and know the words and know the vocabulary and be like, this is what's up. And I want to be that person, so I'm going to try to be that person, not for anyone else, but for 8-year-old me. And I think that's the feedback loop of what life is. That 8-year-old girl, she didn't have what she needed, but I'm going to do my best to make sure that some other 8-year-old girl does. Right. And I think that's a constant thing that in the world that I think we always strive for, is just to do the best we can do.
That is beautiful. And as humans, that's all we can do, the best that we can do. And what is, but knowing that there are things we can do to hopefully support ourselves, and coming from a place of healing our inner child and being there and being what we always needed instead of trying to be everything for everyone else is a great place to start. Seika, you've been absolutely amazing today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. It's just a beautiful conversation. It felt nice. I love this.